This mission will be a snap, Commander. It's just a simple repair operation. What could go wrong? Well, let's count. I lost my crew, can't find the probe. My equipment is being used by the natives as rosary beads. And I have one backpack with my HK-P-12 and 30 rounds of ammo. I believe that places this mission somewhere just south of Fubar.
Now here's a game I've meant to get around to for a long time. I've owned Outcast on GOG for at least a decade now, but I always got distracted by something else right as I was about to sit down and give it a real go. Then came an updated release titled Outcast 1.1, with the promise of a full-on remake following not long after. I found myself at an impasse, and I did what I always do in that type of situation. I put off playing it entirely. Stupid, I know.
I dare to be stupid!
What's even more stupid is that it took close to 6 years after the remake Second Contact came out for me to finally give Outcast a go. What version would I choose, though? I was at another impasse. This time, though, I took drastic action. I decided to play both 1.1 and Second Contact back-to-back. It's really everything or nothing with me.
Yeah, yeah.
Outcast was originally released in
1999!
and developed by Appeal, a Belgian studio established by former employees of Art and Magic, developers of Unreal and Agony, for the Amiga. What games were you thinking of? Outcast fared insanely well with critics at the time, but because 1999 was a stacked year for PC gaming, its 400,000 units sold were below what publisher Infogrames had anticipated. If that name doesn't sound familiar, you would know them today as the company that hollowed out Atari's corpse to wear as a Buffalo Bill-style skin suit in a macabre attempt to usurp the real Atari's legacy. This led them to shelve a planned Dreamcast port, which I personally find absolutely devastating, as this feels like the kind of game that would have been perfect for the Dreamcast. What could Infogrames do, though? It's not as if they published massive hits like Driver or Unreal Tournament under their GT Interactive label that same year. If I keep griping about Infogrames/GT Interactive/Skinsuit Atari, I'll never get around to actually discussing Outcast. It's the far-off year of 2007.
Really?
A scientific breakthrough has enabled mankind to access parallel worlds with Stargate technology.
It's the Fargate! F! It's different from that movie which I have never seen.
Well, whatever you call it, the experiment to test this new technology has gone horribly wrong. It's gone so horribly wrong, in fact, that the probe they sent through the portal got damaged and caused a backfire which opened a black hole back on Earth. With a grim forecast that gives Earth less than a month before destruction, the US military enlists the aid of retired badass Cutter Slade.
We put our faith in Blast Hard Cheese.
Sorry, I'll quit it with the references. Going through the portal with Slade are three key scientists. William Kaufman, the scientist responsible for the whole project. Anthony Shue, a man with an ego greater than his intellect. And Marion Wolf, the team's xenobiologist, who also has her own history with Slade. Tell me that doesn't sound like the setup to a Roland Emmerich film. Right off the bat, Outcast doesn't even waste time pouring on the delicious cheese, and we haven't even gone through the portal. Once Slade does go through the portal, he awakens in a snowy village on the planet Adelpha and is met by one of the locals known as Talon, who refer to Slade as the Ulukai. This is Zokrim, leader of a pacifist sect of Talon known as the Dolotai Guardians. And that's just the start of all the terms and proper nouns that Outcast is going to throw your way. Appeal put a ton of work into their world building, and they are damn proud of it. Throughout the game, you'll be given plenty of opportunities to ask various NPCs about aspects of Talon civilization, with often highly detailed answers. For instance, how Talon are divided into 4 elemental categories that relate to their path in life. Said elemental connection is determined in a coming-of-age ceremony that reveals the destiny of a Talon's essence, their soul. To help you keep track of it all, there's an in-game lexicon which gets updated every time you get a new word or concept explained to you. It's actually refreshing to have an organic way like this to learn about the world I'm in, rather than having a ton of codex entries which all unlock at once the second I enter an area. It really helps give a sense of being an explorer on an unknown world. Now, back to this Ulukai business. Zokrim explains that the Ulukai is a savior figure prophesied to recover the 5 Mons and save the Talon from the oppressive rule of Feyran. Slade, ever the military man, is more concerned with his objective and the location of his teammates. Eventually, though, they come to an agreement that Slade will help the Guardians out until he can find his team. After a brief tutorial section, Outcast sets you free into its world. Though conversations make it clear that this wetland farming region you start in is the intended beginning point, there's nothing stopping you from going wherever you want. All you need to do is find the portal and you can travel to any other region at any time. From here on out, the story follows a format that will be familiar to any BioWare fan. Multiple locations to travel to from the outset, each with their own mini-stories and side quests as you track down the key items needed to progress the story. You even have moments where a main story mission will appear after you've made enough progress. It's actually kind of impressive that Appeal managed to unintentionally beat BioWare to the punch on their own formula a full year before Baldur's Gate 2. Alright, it's time to go out on our adventure and holy fuck, what is that walk cycle? Slade walks around like an astronaut with a full diaper. It's not like any of the other animations in Outcast look just as weird. In fact, the facial animations are really impressive for 1999. Keep in mind, this was back when putting a flat texture on a character's head and bobbing it around was enough to constitute talking. Meanwhile, this game made by a small Belgian studio with an incompetent publisher was just casually sitting there with full lip sync and moving eyebrows. While I'm on the subject of the visuals, I know, I promise I'll get to the gameplay itself real soon. I just feel like I need to address the rest of the graphics now before it seems like I'm deliberately ignoring a blatant issue people are bound to take with it. So, yes, as far as I can tell, those weirdly shaped edges on the terrain are to be expected. I tried several solutions I found on the internet, and all I truly succeeded in doing was making the surfaces on the water transparent. From what I understand, this is due to how Outcast renders its environments with voxels rather than the 3D accelerated polygons that many games were switching to at the time. Now, I'm sure there's someone far more technically minded who can more accurately explain this, but basically, voxels are less hardware intensive than polygons, and if Outcast had used the more common techniques of the time, then rendering these vast, open-ended locations with tons of NPCs would have been impossible for GPUs at the time to handle. I'm not going to pretend that it looks good, but if I have the choice between Outcast existing or being some pie-in-the-sky pipe dream, I'm picking the option that gives me a game to play. Okay, now we can move on to talking about Outcast gameplay. What we have here is an action-adventure game with a heavy emphasis on the adventure side of the equation. You walk around and talk with various NPCs as you look for the region's Mon. Besides racking up several side quests and learning about the setting, they'll occasionally provide hints on puzzles you'll come across in the world. Like I said in my Dark Savior video, I don't have much of a mind for puzzles, but I enjoyed piecing things together until I reached that eureka moment. Except for this rope bridge maze that I accidentally cheesed by jumping at the right angle. That one's on me though. And everyone else who does the same after seeing this video. When you aren't chatting up the locals, you'll be running around blasting Pharaon soldiers and occasionally hostile wildlife. Damn these spitting vines! Why do they do so much damage? While you start off with only a pistol, you can buy other weapons from merchants in the city of Okriana. Slade was supposed to have all of these on him when he went through the portal, but as the Talon believe his equipment to be holy, they have taken to keeping bits and pieces for themselves to use as good luck charms. Okay, seriously, I am in love with the lengths they went to in order to explain stuff like this. There are tons of gaming conventions that we're so used to that we don't even think to question it half the time. Why are there ammo packs and medkits just sitting there in NPCs' homes when they can't even use the weapons that they're for? Because they don't know what they actually are and think these things are artifacts of their gods. Why can't I use the same energy weapons as the enemies? Because they channel a type of energy only Talon are capable of harnessing. Why do all Talon miraculously speak English? Because spoilers! These asshole merchants here are even spelled out to be profiting off of people's misery and desperation, to the point that their prices actually drop the further you get in the game, simply because other Talon are starting to have hope again. Outcast even has an in-universe explanation for saving. Saving! At the start, Zokrim gives you a crystal called a Gamsav, and I didn't even notice that pun until I was writing this script. The Gamsav works like a normal inventory item, and when you use it, it calls up the save screen. Pretty standard stuff, cool way to immerse the player. But wait, there's more! You need the entire animation to play out after saving in order for it to actually register. The game also spells out that enemies will notice the light that it emits while you're saving, so you'd better make sure you're in a good spot first. Considering how easy some parts of Outcast would be if I could quick save like in an old FPS, I think this is a neat way to keep the player from save scumming without being overly punishing. They put this much thought into what is typically just opening the menu and hitting save. Have I made it clear yet how impressed I am with Appeal's commitment to their world building? The shooty bang bang part of the proceedings is solid as well. Not on the level of the world building, mind you, but solid. Besides the starting pistol, there's a second rapid-fire pistol that shoots shotgun slugs? Whatever, it's cool. Then there's a silenced tranquilizer gun that's great for taking out patrols by knocking them out, then double-tapping them with the starter pistol, saving on ammo the coward's way. It's not as useful mid-combat, though, as there's no way to aim this gun and move at the same time. After that is the beam rifle that you have to charge before firing. At first this one isn't too useful, but after a couple upgrades it becomes one of the deadliest weapons in your arsenal at the cost of requiring more ammo for each shot type. The obligatory explosive weapon is a similar story. What starts off as a trip mine launcher before upgrading into a more reliable grenade launcher. Finally, we have the flamethrower that burns through ammo so fast that I almost never used it despite its strength. When it comes to actually firing these guns, Outcast opts for a fairly ahead of its time design choice of first or third person views. At the time, most games of this kind would have a first person aiming option, but it was done in a similar way to Ocarina of Time, where you could aim more precisely, but at the cost of not being able to move, similar to what I talked about with the tranquilizer gun. Because I was so used to that kind of aiming, I initially avoided using the first person view in combat since there are very few times in Outcast where standing still is a smart idea, especially when about a dozen energy blasts are headed your way. The good auto-aim also played a part, so I stuck to a third-person view for about half the game until I started to actually need to aim at specific targets. Though there was something about the way movement feels in first person that kept me from using it outside of those instances. I think the problem is that it's too smooth. I feel like I'm gliding. Is this what movement in boomer shooters feels like to people who don't enjoy them? No wonder I can never get any of my friends to play Blood. Well, that and the obscene difficulty.
Well, I'm right aren't I?
Even with auto-aim, the enemies won't make things easy on you, especially in the early game when you don't have much of an arsenal. Their AI is fiendishly clever and will do everything they can to flank you while you're preoccupied with their buddies. I died more than once simply because I wasn't paying careful enough attention to the minimap. Their intelligence and ability to overwhelm you with sheer numbers encourages you to stick to ambush tactics by sneaking around and setting explosive traps before engaging. Or it would if explosive damage made any damned sense in this game. I don't know if this is a problem with the original release or just 1.1, but when an explosion happens, there's an initial burst of damage followed by an extra bit of damage a second or two later. I also suspect there's a bit of RNG to the damage they deal, because there were several times where my explosives didn't seem to do anything at all, yet other times where they were one-hit kills. There is one other way to go about weakening the opposition. Hit them right in the supply line. Each region provides some form of food, money, or weapons to Faron's soldiers, and if you can convince the leaders of a region to stop supplying them, the soldiers will weaken afterwards. Less food reduces their max health, less money leads to fewer enemies to face, and fewer weapons equals weaker attacks. Yet again, we have a cool and clever way of integrating the gameplay with the world. The only significant issue I took with the gameplay is the stealth aspects. Enemies can only detect you by sight, but their sight range is hard to get a read on, and there's no suspicion meter or the like to give you an idea of how alert they are. They simply go from docile to alerting all their friends. You can go prone to make it a little harder for them to see you from a distance, but it's still not much easier to sneak around. You move at a snail's pace while prone, and their patrol patterns are so erratic that I can never quite figure out how to get past them without going in guns blazing. For the most part, I wound up using stealth as a way to get into position before opening fire than actually doing much sneaking around. Now on to the story. What we have here is a classic case of a perfectly competent tale that doesn't break new ground, but does what it needs to in order to keep the player invested. Going back to my Stargate comparison, it's much like a good summer blockbuster. Yeah, you'll probably see a few of the twists coming, a couple plot points feel rushed, but the ride is fun enough, the voice performances are good enough, and its world is so richly developed that it doesn't really matter. As a result, I don't really have much to say about the plot itself that doesn't devolve into nitpicking. Yay! I don't have to put up a spoiler warning! Okay, so that's the background info, visuals, gameplay, and story covered. What am I forgetting? Oh right, the music! I'm not usually the type to care all that much about a game's score, both the musical and review kinds, come to think of it. Outcast's score, however, is one of those rare exceptions. Composer Lenny Moore and the whole-ass orchestra that got to perform the music provide a very John Williams-esque feel to the soundtrack, and I'm not sure you could ask for a much better vibe to complement your sci-fi adventure. It didn't surprise me at all when I found out during my research that Lenny Moore would go on to provide music for the Old Republic. More than once I'd hear the music swell as I was exploring, and part of me expected Binary Sunset to start playing. I'd play a snippet to prove my point, but the copyright hammer and all that. If only there was a bit in-game that referenced Star Wars. Wait a minute! Alright, that should do it for Outcast 1.1, so let's move on to Second Contact. Alright, not crazy about the motion comic version of the intro. Getting into the game proper, and the opening feels like a good HD upgrade to the original game, and what the hell is that? Why are the subtitles translating the Talon words? Slade has no way of knowing what those words even mean yet. Why would you invalidate the purpose of half the dialogue in the game? Like, okay, I can understand having it as an option for accessibility purposes, but why have it on by default? And if you're gonna have it on by default, wouldn't it have been better to tie it into how filled out your lexicon is? What do you mean they had to patch in the ability to turn that off? Wow. That is such a bizarre design choice that seems to undermine one of the most engaging aspects of the original game. Okay, got the GamSav, so I'll make a quick save before I make sure the footage is actually recording properly, and... Are you kidding me? What the hell was that? If you're gonna make it instant, then just let me save from the menu. Ugh, this is off to a rough start. Guess I'll go talk to Jan and see how the shooting changed. Well, it feels like every other budget third-person shooter now. I guess not having to switch between first and third person to aim now is a plus. Not digging that shaky cam effect while I'm aiming, though. At least it isn't triggering my motion sickness. Yet. Time to finish the rest of the tutorial, and hey, I can sprint now! You did it, Second Contact! You actually managed to add something that improved the experience! And then that achievement is undone by the changes to swimming and sneaking. In the original Outcast, or at least 1.1, you have separate buttons to swim up and swim down. Pretty basic, right? Well, see, they felt modern gamers are a bit too simple for something like that, so they changed it to only being able to swim down, and once you let go, Slade immediately starts swimming back up. I don't get this change at all. Outcast is littered with pools of water to swim around in with items strewn about at the bottom. What's the point of changing it so that I have to hold a button down the entire time if I want to gather all of those items? Sneaking is just outright worthless now. It was already bad before, but now that Slade just does this weird slouch rather than crawling around means it's even harder to hide behind obstacles while feeling like he has about the same movement speed as he had while crawling. To give Second Contact some credit, it does include an icon over the heads of enemies to let you know if they've seen if you're sneaking around or not. It doesn't help a whole lot though, since they go from suspicious to, "He's here! Everyone open fire!" in about a second, but it's helpful being able to know exactly when I need to start blasting. Or I would know that if I needed to bother with stealth at all for most of my playthrough. Combat already began to skew towards the easy side once you built up your arsenal in the original, but Second Contact decides that still wasn't easy enough. I'm sure you noticed while I was talking about 1.1 that bullets were their own objects in the world that moved slow enough for distant enemies to avoid. Well, they're much, much faster here. This all but reduces the combat to pull trigger until they ragdoll. I realize that sounds like the combat of most shooters, but the fact that it's harder to miss rather than to hit pretty much any enemy means that there's no challenge or strategy to taking out foes. The ragdolling doesn't look too hot either. The way they go limp the second you kill them is hilarious, and not in a good way. Some of the death animations in 1.1 were overdramatic enough that I wasted an extra round or two before realizing they were dead, but that's no reason to scrap the death animations entirely. They had no problem recycling the animations for dialogue, no matter how bad it looks with models that have much more detail. Honestly, Second Contact feels much more like a fan remake than a professional one overseen by several members of the original team. It clearly respects the original game, but it doesn't seem to understand what made it work so well. The attempts to streamline things for modern gamers are slapdash and undermine the sense of exploring an alien world. And its reliance on animation data from back before we could render individual fingers makes Second Contact look far cheaper than the original game. This right here may have a lower poly count, but there is a cohesive design that competes with its contemporaries. This doesn't even look as good as other B-tier games from the same year like Elix. I love Piranha Bytes in their games, but it takes effort to be jankier than them. I really don't like being so hard on Second Contact. It's not fun to rip into this game because I can still see that great game underneath. Maybe if Appeal had more time or more money, they could have polished this up and made the remake that Outcast deserved. There's definite passion for this world they created. You don't reform your studio a decade after folding solely to bring your cult classic game back to the masses if you have no passion for it. I truly, genuinely hope that Appeal has learned from Second Contact, because Outcast 2 comes out later this year and it would break my heart to see a game they have been trying to get made since the PS2 era come out in a similar state. Seriously, fuck Infogrames. The only reason people don't hate these Atari grave-robbing fucks as much as they should is because Infogrames had the luck of Acclaim's idiocy always getting the headlines at the time. In conclusion, Outcast is the kind of diamond in the rough that demonstrates exactly why I love playing older video games. With clever techniques, a small team of passionate developers overcame technical limitations of the time to make a game they deserve to be proud of. Outcast sets out to give you an engrossing adventure in another world and succeeds tremendously. It's not a flawless game by any measure, but it is one I would heartily recommend. As for its remake, well, I think I've said all that needed to be said by this point. It's a rushed game that seems to fundamentally misunderstand what it's remaking, and in doing so ruins much of the immersion that they got right on the first try nearly 20 years prior. Outcast 1.1 is far and away the better experience, even if it did occasionally lock up on me if I tried to buy more than one thing at a time from the merchants. With any luck, we'll be able to look back on Second Contact as a brief rough patch for Appeal once Outcast 2 releases. If not, then at least we still have Outcast 1.1, which is only $6 on GOG and Steam. Again, I heartily recommend this to anyone watching. Well, that's it for today's game. See you next time.
I just want to make sure that we are clear. It's the Fargate. Goes far, get it? And there is no way it came from that movie or that syndicated series based on the movie.
But it sure was a good movie.
Yeah, yes, it was.